Good morning, everybody. My name is Lawrence Kruger. I'm the Director of the Organization for Tropical Studies South Africa programs. I have been a lecturer and a field mentor for students that have attended the program for the last 18 years. I did my PhD at the University of Cape Town in forest and savanna ecology, and I'm particularly interested in disturbance ecology, how fire and herbivory, whether it be mega herbivores right down to insects, might influence vegetation dynamics. So I've been incredibly fortunate. I'm actually sixth generation botanist, so I come from a long line of forest ecologists. But I've been very fortunate in my career so far. I've been able to work with some incredible mentors, both at the University of Cape Town and then more lately here in the Kruger Park. But probably the most important experience that I've had that really set me on this path was working in Bolivia some 20 odd years ago. I worked with a group of young biologists who were engaged in inventory work in remote parts of Bolivia, and given their 4 years of work, it resulted in the establishment of the Madidi National Park. And just to see these youngsters completely in control of their own destiny, they'd found their own money, they'd figured out how to make a contribution, and it was a very liberating experience, but also a kind of real epiphany where I realized that this realm is actually relatively easy to engage in. And I think that was probably one of the most formative experiences that I've had, aside from all those incredible mentors. A typical day for us is broad and varied. So obviously the study abroad, we might be engaging in field lectures, running workshops, biodiversity training workshops. But a large component of what we do is also engage in management-driven research. So on any course, we probably spend about 50% of our time in the field, which is why I took the job in the first place. And the idea is that as we providing the students with exposure and experience and so on, we're also collecting long-term data sets. So when we are in the field, we up at dawn to do bird surveys. We might have put out some small mammal traps, and then we go and check those, and then do a full day of botanical surveys. So during the semester, it's incredibly broad and varied. But in our winter, your summer, we also run a range of research campaigns. And the project I'm going to tell you about today forms a basis for one of those campaigns. The key question that we're focusing on here is how disturbance in the form of mega herbivores and fire might influence these ecosystems. And a lot of our work is driven by management needs. So this link between the research which we're doing and the management actions is critically important. So how this project is structured, we selected 37 sites initially to cover a range in vegetation structure, from very open sites to, in this case, relatively treed sites. But we're also comparing to sites in Eswatini, which are heavily wooded. So we've got a broad range of large tree density, and so we can enumerate the change in vegetation density and what are the consequences for resident faunal communities. So if we see a significant change in the overstory structure, what are the trophic cascade consequences for resident communities? We have enumerated the floristic communities, the vegetation structure, but we're also interested in the biodiversity consequence of the structure change. And so we've also engaged in understanding how the bird communities, the small mammals, the mesomammals, and the bat communities have changed with this very dynamic shift in the vegetation structure. At the same time, though, we're also interested in establishing experiments. So about 2 years ago, we built a range of experimental fences to exclude herbivores at various scales. So we set up 3 large or full exclosures, which keeps out all mammals, all animals larger than a rabbit. And we've also set up 6 partial exclosures, which keeps out only mega herbivores, just to start experimenting a little bit with the effects of these various herbivore guilds. And so since 2013, we've done exactly the same thing every winter and every summer across these 37 sites, but also the 54 sites in Eswatini. One of the key results to emerge so far is that when comparing the sites in the Kruger Park with those in Swaziland, in other words, the very open sites, the very dense sites, we certainly are seeing a change in diversity, in functional diversity, with the change in vegetation structure. And what we're seeing is in these very open systems is a decline in heterogeneity, whereas in Eswatini, those ecosystems are a lot more heterogeneous. And with the increase in heterogeneity, we tend to see a greater diversity, not only of species, but also functional diversity. What we're now curious about is how these ecosystems recover. So we're experimenting with savannas. By erecting these fences now, we can determine how vegetation structure might recover. And so the whole slew of questions that come after. The one that's particularly prevalent in my mind right now is, if you're keeping herbivores out, how are these, particularly the woody communities, how are they regenerating and recovering? So I'm interested in the mechanism of recovery, and then again what the trophic cascades might look like. You'll find in all your careers that collaboration is everything. And we encountered a group of scientists from the University of Florida that were doing pretty much the same kind of work as we were doing here, but in Swaziland. So they were interested in bush encroachment, we were interested in the impact of elephants and fire on ecosystems. We combined forces, and suddenly we've got this fabulous platform for experimenting and understanding savanna dynamics. Both of us had arrived in the same set of methodologies in our own messy fashion. And so science is simply not linear. You know, it's not as if you can come up with a series of questions and come up with ideal methodologies. We stumbled a lot, and we also argued a lot. But eventually we got to the point where we'd agreed on a standard set of methodologies, and so we could carry out the work and rendering our work in the Kruger Park comparable to Swaziland, but also rendering comparable to a whole bunch of other global work. So this collaboration between ourselves, OTS, the University of Florida, and members of scientific services here in Skukuza is called the BROWSE project, the Biodiversity Research on Wildlife and Savanna Ecosystems, led by Bob McCleery at the University of Florida, Donovan Tye and myself at OTS, and Corli Coetsee at SANparks, as well as other partners from the University of Eswatini. And as you can imagine, this is a great platform for students to come and work. So whilst we focus on the fundamentals, there are all kinds of other questions that have emerged. So one, for instance, we have a PhD student looking at the landscape of fear and how that might change with vegetation structure. So there are any number of opportunities that might emerge from this project. Senior theses, MScs, PhDs, postdocs. We simply can't cover all the bases. So whilst we're doing the fundamental work and engaging the key questions, there's so many other questions that are emerging.